it's just a fact that London and the US have much more global roles because a lot of the global roles typically sit in their headquarters. The second one is time zones. A lot of the folks, including myself when I was in London, I'll just put a 3 p.m. call on my time without thinking that actually in Singapore, it's an 11 p.m. call for them. Time zones are a lot friendlier, I think, if you're doing these global roles in these countries as well.
So I always said, no discomfort, no growth. When you feel discomfort, it's good because you are growing.
Being in a completely different environment, it brings a lot of perspective in life on the uncertainty of life. But at the same time, it gives you a much bigger appreciation when things go right. So I think COVID was a flipping point for us where we had kids. We were also sort of, thinking very, very deeply and very reflectively what we want.
If, let's say, family was out of the picture, do you feel that staying overseas and continuing on that career progression would have been a better move for you, or coming back to Singapore and trying to, change the tide slightly? Welcome back to another episode of Wise and Shine. I'm your host, Dawn, SG Budget Babe, and best-selling author. That's my new handle. And I'm joined here today with Alex.
Hi, everyone. And best-selling author.
Yep.
Already sold 10 million copies.
No, you're holding me to US global benchmark for Singaporean authors. We don't even have 10 million in our market to buy.
Okay, please share with us what does best-selling author mean.
Well, it's been number one on Amazon several times now, several weeks. So I think it's good. It's not one day, so it's several weeks and repeated. And then it's also climbing up the Straits Times chart. Unfortunately, because my competition are the two PropNext CEO now, so it's hard to get the number one spot there, but we're still trying.
So if you haven't already gotten your hands on her best-selling book, please check it out. What's it called again?
Take Back Control of Your Money.
Take Back Control of Your Money.
But enough about me, because today we have a more interesting topic and better stories to share. But do you want to talk about your new brand first?
Yeah. So usually I introduce myself as Alex Low, Growth Mindset Coach, but I recently rebranded to be called the Growth Connector. Why the Growth Connector? Because I realized that I actually connect a lot of people to the right solutions through my resources, networks, and ecosystem. And through all of that, they experience growth and they also get peace of mind, which is a lot to do with what I focus on, holistic well-being. Yeah, so.
And you've connected several guests on the whole Wise and Shine series to date too.
Yes.
So today's guests are not connected by you. They're thanks to our lovely producer who managed to sort out their stories. But we'll let them introduce themselves to you after we've introduced the topic. So for all of you out there who are wondering, should you venture overseas to build your career, or should you have that developed here locally? I know when I graduated, there was a question I asked myself a lot. And honestly, I really wanted to pursue a career either in the US or in China, but fate had me stay in this sunny island instead. But we're curious to hear from people who have actually ventured overseas. And today's one comes with a click, because it is not just going overseas, but they chose to come back home. So we're going to talk about why they went, why they didn't stay, what they saw back here in our sunny island that was more appealing to them. So without further ado, we'll let them introduce themselves to you. Chris, do you want to share yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Ngoi. I'm currently the Chief Strategy and Business Officer for Libeara. It's a wholly owned subsidiary out of Standard Chartered. And we focus on tokenization of real-world assets. So within the context of working overseas, I actually grew up in China, in Shanghai. So I did a fair bit of American school on that front. Came back to study secondary school all the way to uni and army. And then subsequently, after I graduated, I went to Hong Kong right away. Came back to Singapore for a little bit and then went to London for close to 8 to 9 years before coming home around 3 years back.
So I'm Hon Mun. I spent the first 15 years working for multinational companies like Motorola, Nokia, and Microsoft before I transitioned the next 15 years with Asia family-owned businesses. And I live in 5 cities and across a diverse industries, mainly in tech, but venture capital as well. And interestingly, in farming. So those were the experience.
And you've been involved not just with the private sector, but also in government projects, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Could you share a bit more about that? Because I don't think it's every day that we have a guest.
In a way, there were like 2 governments. One of them is in Thailand and the other is Singapore. So the Singapore one is interesting. I got a call from two very senior ministers one day. And then next thing I know is I became the CEO of a farm. Actually, it is a joint venture between the Chinese and Singapore government. For our side, I'm looking at food security. For the Chinese would be food safety.
And for both of you, you decided to drop all the stuff you built overseas to come back home to Singapore. We want to know what made you do so.
Actually, the reason why I came back is really simple. So it's really because I wanted to be a tiger dad. So I'm a father of 5 and 3.
Wow.
No, sorry. I'm a father of 2, 5-year-old and 3-year-old. Sorry. Father of 2, 5-year-old and 3-year-old. And when my wife was pregnant with my first, in my head, I wanted to be like, the tiger dad sort of the family. So I actually flew back to Singapore. And in 1 week, this is my accounting sort of training coming to practice. I built a spreadsheet of 100 properties all around Singapore, ranked by the top 20 schools, the entry criteria, the distance to the school. So I had like this whole frame sort of built out. And in 1 week, I viewed 100 properties. And at the end of that week, I sort of bought one, which is near one of the top 20 schools. And then sort of when I did come back around 3 years ago, instead of a household of 3, I came back with a household 4. So the one I got previously was now too small. So I had to sell that place. And I restarted the look for another 200 properties.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
For yourself?
It was very abrupt and sudden because my mom was very sick. And her illness actually, even professional caregivers couldn't take care. So I thought, well, maybe I should quit my job and come back and look after her.
So it's interesting that both of you came back for family. But what was the impact that you felt that had on your career and the considerations that went behind that thought process before you made the move?
You probably read a recent article about how men is having difficulties as they go into the later part of their career because their identity is tied to their work. And if you stop working or you quit your job, your identity is gone. So I think I went through some of those as well. And it takes time to adjust. But fortunately, what I did was, by chance, got into a self-discovery journey, started with learning coaching. And in a discipline called ontology coaching. And so that actually helps. What do you really want? And then you start looking at, don't let the work define you, and so on and so forth. And that actually helps quite a bit. So right now, I run my own coaching and consulting business, and I'm also teaching as an adjunct professor at NUS Business School. Yeah.
For you, I mean, Hon Mun, it was very abrupt, right? That you had to leave. How long was that time that you needed to make that decision?
It was really a tough decision because to say let go something that you have been doing for 30 odd years. But a friend spoke with me and something shifted. I said, yeah, it's the right time.
I'm going to ask a very hypothetical question. So if, let's say, family was out of the picture, do you feel that staying overseas and continuing on that career progression would have been a better move for you, or coming back to Singapore and trying to, change the tide slightly?
I wouldn't think so. I think at this juncture, when I look at it, I think I felt that life is about balance. You can't have one thing, you focus totally on career and then not have the other balance. Mm-hmm. At a certain stage, you realize, you ask yourself, what is important? What is missing? And I felt that my coaching clients the same, very successful in one area, but because they're so successful in that area, they missed out the other areas. But it's all about balancing, I felt, yeah.
Chris, what about for yourself? I mean, you shared that you looked through you did that spreadsheet over the weekend, but how quick was that decision for you to make and that you said, okay, we're going to move already next week or next month?
I mean, London was always supposed to be a 2-year gig. And then, year after year, it became like a 8-year gig. And somewhere in between, like, I think year 5 to year 8 was COVID. So I think COVID was a sort of, a flipping point for us where we had kids. We sort of, we're also at an inflection point in our life. We're like, look, coming back to, Hong Man's earlier point around balance, we were also sort of, thinking very, very deeply and very reflectively what we want. Where do we want to bring up our kids? Where do we want to bring our, sort of develop our career? Where is it sort of closer to home? Do we want to spend more time with family? Where are our friends? Like, these are all the considerations that sort of, people need to think deeply. It did take quite some time. So, between sort of, me sort of viewing that 100 houses to actually us moving back is probably 4 years journey.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it was sort of, we got to find the right roles. We also wanted to make sure that we don't shortchange, a lot of the experiences that we've built overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, a lot of planning and a lot of deep thinking sort of went into that particular decision as well.
So a very, very different kind of
yes.
journey and mindset compared to Hon Mun. Let's talk a little bit about opportunities that you might have missed out if you had stayed in Singapore and not gone overseas at all. Do you think things would have changed? Would you be a different person today?
I think it will be different. I think about it in a couple of ways. The first way is, from a career growth and global role perspective, it's just a fact that London and the US have much more global roles because a lot of the global roles typically sit in their headquarters, and a lot of the multinationals typically are, in Europe or in US. Mm-hmm. I think that's just the reality of how the world operates. Mm-hmm. So, if you're sort of, in a sort of place where you're like, I want to be the global head of something, it just is the reality where there's much more global sort of roles in these countries as well.
In terms of a career kind of a
That's correct.
Trajectory.
That's correct. So I think it's just objectively that's true.
Right. So go abroad if people want to aspire for a global
That's
role,
correct.
or rethink your expectations if you want to stay here.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
The second one is time zones. No one thinks about it, but in Europe or in the US, there's a reason why, like in Singapore, like I've never worked like so many late nights. And the reason is because, once again, like it is afterthought. I don't think it comes from a place where I want you guys to wake up at 1 a.m. to have a call with me. A lot of the folks, including myself when I was in London, I'll just put a 3 p.m. call on my time without thinking that actually in Singapore, it's an 11 p.m. call for them. Yeah. So it's not a like, I want to make you work late, as opposed to it's just a sort of, unconscious thing that they do. So time zones are a lot friendlier, I think, if you're doing these global roles in these countries as well. And then the sort of third one, just sort of thinking back about the trade-offs, I think it depends on how you define what a successful life is. So, like, is it really so much different having a global role versus, a pretty successful regional one where you can do quite a number of things? There's like success can be defined by so many different things that I think, I think I would still be okay. And the growth is just going to be in different areas in my life.
What about looking at, the dollars and cents in terms of remuneration as well as relocation packages?
For me, I think specifically compared to London and maybe Europe in general, if you're doing a parallel move between Europe and back to Singapore, you would typically earn more net. And the reason is very simple. It's taxes. And it's just a math thing where, if you're sort of going sort of at the same time, at the same rate, you do typically earn a little bit more in Singapore, and the quality of life with the same income level, once again, it's generally higher in Singapore because you're closer to home. You typically get help. And sort of, the whole sort of environment is just a little bit more conducive on that front.
Nice.
I like how you brought up that contrast between career growth in terms of a global role versus a regional role. And in terms of that dollars and remuneration, would you say that someone who is choosing to go with the regional role route, so staying here in Asia, never venturing out to the US or Europe, but climbing to the top of that ladder, would that be on par with what you see the folks in the global roles earning?
Yeah, so I think it will be on par. And actually, there are quite a number of global roles in Singapore. The problem always comes back to time zones. So even if you do a global role out of Singapore, what ends up happening, and this I've personally seen this happen a few times to my friends. There's only that many 1 a.m. calls you can take before you're like, I don't want to do this anymore.
That's true.
There got to be a better way to live my life. So I think, to the point on dollar and census, it really boils down to balance. It boils down to what you want in life. And I think, somewhere down the road, you're like, actually, is it even worth it?
I'm going to venture into another area as well. But when someone thinks of going for a global role, and because you've been in those Western countries, do you find that it's typically much harder an Asian to be given that role, given that the competition is global and a lot of the Westerners are fighting for that same hat? Because if we look at the media, we don't see a lot of Asians getting those roles. We're starting to see a shift now. But those Asians typically are people who have spent a lot of time in the Western countries. They're not folks like, I grew up in Singapore, I studied overseas for a little bit, and then I moved over to work in a global headquarters for a couple of years, and I get that. It's a really long path. So do you also observe the same happening?
I think about this in terms of like a T-shape for a career. Like you need to be known or like really good at a specific topic or expertise. And I think that's kind of like your anchor. But the thing is, let's say you're a 10 at doing specific things, but in terms of communicating, in terms of presenting yourself, in terms of making yourself known, doing the right relationships, connecting the right people, I think to me, that's kind of like the breadth that a lot of more Asian-oriented professionals probably neglect a little bit more. And that's something that I see a little bit more in the Western world, where there's a little bit more of that sort of inclination to develop there. So to me, actually coming back to, how I'm thinking about it for my kids, it's about optionality, right? I think, it's much harder to develop that substance. And then, to develop the sort of, critical thinking, the analytical skills, the friendships, the ability to present, coherently and articulate your ideas in an intelligent manner. That's actually quite, like, to me, that's a lot easier to pick up after you have a specific substance that you want to share.
Understand. Hon Mun, what about, you spend a lot of time in Asia. Do you agree or disagree with what Chris has just talked about?
I felt that I was reflecting as well what he said. And I have the opposite side of what Chris does, because my overseas role is not from a company that sent me out to do that, except for when I first started in Hong Kong. That's the only one. Most of the other overseas posting is I literally quit, like say in Microsoft, and then went to join my customer. So when you think about that, you're back to your remuneration packages. In fact, if you go from a global MNC to a local Asian family-owned SME or even listed companies, is always the best you can get is probably equal from base salary. But most of the time, you have to take a pay cut. I think some of your guests in your show has said that before. But we should not look at it from this, the basic salary. There's a lot of other packages that goes in. In fact, if you look at basic salary, if you take into consideration like my time in Thailand, tax, exchange rates, and no CPF, you actually take a pretty big pay cut. But then what I didn't know 6 months later when I got my bonus, then I know the bonus structure is very different. You could get anywhere from 6 to 3 years, 6 months to 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, especially if you're in a market that is growing, you're in an industry that is growing. And then you have a chauffeur, a nice car, even expense statements and expense account and things like that. So you take that plus the things that we don't usually think about is personal growth. How often do you have a market that is big enough, opportunity big enough that you get to be tested in all different situations? I have one very interesting thing is weeks. So I thought the grass is greener the other side. So I quit this big company, and then just weeks into my new job, my CEO called me in. We just lost a big iPhone deal, the first generation ones. I need you to fix it. Will you? And I was like, there's no heads up, no resources. I have no idea how to do it. So the remaining week, I was totally sleepless nights. Then wanting to go back, wanting to just come back and get back my old job. But fortunately, I did not.
And because you chose to pursue your career growth in Asia, that usually looks very different from those who pursue in a Western country. What are these differences that you think after hearing Chris' story?
When I started with Motorola, when the wireless industries kind of boomed, right? I have a colleague of mine, actually from, is Hong Kong Canadian, right? He doubled down in China when China just took off. We both get into China. But I decided, in Asia, Singapore was the headquarters. So we do the Asian regional role. So I can be a director here, this and so on. But he kept doubling down. And he ended up having a career that is very different from me. So we are more, I would see myself more broad. He is more in depth. Yeah. Very different outcome as well.
And today he is still in China.
He is, but he retired he's basically a full-time board member for many companies.
Wow. What about any colleagues or peers you know of who chose the Western route then? How do you see their career panning out versus yours and your
Good question.
Asia colleague?
So if you plan to be in your company for a long time, I would always recommend, and this is one of the things that I felt I didn't do, was that if there's a chance, go back to the headquarters for a couple of years, if not more. Why? Because like Chris has mentioned earlier, there are a lot of things. It's not, why you are given certain opportunities that others don't. It's not because of your hard skills. It's most of the time, it's not because of your hard skills. If you don't have the hard skills, you probably won't stay in the company, that job for too long. There's a lot of other sales skills, soft skills. Do people know you? Yeah. Do people trust you? And this know and trust is you start with building relationship, connections first, right? Then you build relationship over the years. They build trust. And when they trust you, there's a job. This person very good in the hard skills, but this person, I can trust. Normally, this person would score higher than the other person.
That's a very fascinating insight. I didn't think about it that way.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm. But even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Yep, now back to the show.
What do you think then, were some of the greatest challenges professionally, being a Singaporean and working in a country that you are unfamiliar with?
Would language barriers be one of them?
My personal experience is not really. I spent a lot of time in Bangkok actually, and I grew a team from 2 to 168. Hundreds of $1 million of revenue annually. I still don't speak Thai. I think one of the important things is communication is beyond words, the language. We probably know that we all speak English, but we're actually not communicating. That's one of the things I realized. So if you don't speak the local language, not that I don't want to learn, but there's many reasons, is you learn to look at other things that are more important, or equally important, let me put it this way, which is body language, sensing the energy, the presence, all these. And that actually, when then you go back to an environment where you speak the language itself, you're more in tune to what is spoken, what is not spoken. The not spoken part is where caught many of us off guard. How many times my wife would say, it's not what you said, it's your tone. Oh, okay. Now I understood. Even my children are saying that. Now you understand, right? I say, yeah.
That's a great insight, right? The reason why... So I lived and worked in Thailand for 4 years. And I went for Thai class because... when I was there, I was a project manager launching a 100-room service apartment. So I was dealing with the construction guys, the architects. The architects were Westerners, but the construction guys were all local guys. So there needed to be a little bit of a colloquial Thai that I needed to speak with them, right? And in the end, it was a great 4 years that I was in Thailand.
Okay, Chris, what about yourself?
And I think I sort of went to a country, where they're a little bit more straightforward as well. But actually, like I have an interesting point. I think to build on your earlier point around growth. Actually, one of the advice that I've always heard, which I think is quite good, is you always want to be in a company that's growing, an industry that's growing, a country that's growing, or a function that's growing. Pick one. But if nothing is growing, that's the challenge. To the point around growth and challenges, I actually think at some level, we all have a choice. And I think that's a really important one. We all have a choice. Making the choice that would fit, your life circumstance or whatever growth that you want to do. And that's actually quite difficult, whether it is to go overseas or pick an industry or pick a company that you want to work for. That's actually quite. It takes a bit of a skill and probably fair bit of luck.
When you talk about choices, I think that's also where it looks very different for everyone depending on what age or life stage that choice comes to you. Because if someone's young, like a fresh graduate, it would be easier for them to pursue these growth overseas with lesser considerations in mind, probably just their parents. But for a lot of our listeners who are mid-career professionals, especially people wanting to make the switch, I've seen my friends, very few of them successfully do it, but when they do, it requires, or so far, what has happened is the spouse gives up everything that they have built in Singapore to go abroad with their partner, sometimes with a kid, sometimes not, and without knowing whether or not they'll be able to find another role or to pursue their own growth there. What are your thoughts or advice for our listeners who are mid-career professionals wanting to make that choice now, but having these family considerations, especially if their partner is not 100% keen on, yeah, sure, I'll give up everything so you can pursue your dreams?
I think it's tough if one partner is doing it for the other partner. I think that is really, really tough. I would say really think twice, because you're doing it for somebody, and then this something inside you will always still be there. But if you shift the mindset and look at it, there are moments where both sides look at it as a family as a whole, like the sacrifices is shared. That's a very different thing. The buy-in has to be from both. You got to treat it as the family as one unit, not just your career, or she's giving up for your career, then what about my career? So that kind of discussion, if you still have that discussion, then I would say think again.
Chris, what about your case?
I think, especially within a family unit, unless sort of it's very, very clear on the sacrifices each of them. I mean, everyone's making sacrifices. It's never going to be 50-50. I think that's just the reality that everyone needs to accept. But I think everyone just needs to be very, very clear on the options and choices that everyone's making, because if not, there will be resentment, I think, where like, oh, I thought I gave this up, but why it's not you're appreciative or whatever. So I think within the family unit, the communication piece is incredibly important. The second point, maybe just to share, and I think you sort of highlighted a couple of things. Actually, it's entirely possible to do it in a more deliberate manner, stretched over a period of time. And that's exactly what happened. So, when my wife went to London, it took me a year and a half of flying to London every 3 months or so to have coffees with a lot of people to build the trust so that I can eventually land a role. In the same way, and in the same way, when we moved back, I moved back first, got the place, decorated the place, got the furnitures, so that when her and the kids moved back, that's all sort of set up and ready. So, it's, I think it's also really important to distinguish, the process of a move and decision may not be one point in time. It could be spread across a period of time so that it works. Because circumstances in life, experiences are different. Your industry is different. So I think it's important to also contextualize that it's entirely possible to look at it over a stretch of time. And then finally, for a lot of the mid-career type professionals, I think it's also sort of in the same way, it's also important to, think about it as not a binary thing where I need to, quit my job and do a different thing. Actually, if you ask me, and we were just sharing the experiences just now, it's very like fashionable to have a portfolio career. Or like investing in multiple things or being a podcast host and a best-selling author. And I think it's, it's very complementary to have a portfolio career. And I think it's also very complementary to start exploring, other things that may augment each other. It's not like hedging. It's entirely possible for you to have multiple passions, multiple careers, multiple hats that you wear at any point in time that is actually very complementary in what you want to do in life.
I love that point. I think this is really all about wherever life takes you and the decisions that you make. The problem that some people have is they just let the tides of life push them. And they don't really think about how this fits into their broader career portfolio or goals or the stories that they can actually share because of all these little things that have come together. They don't do that work of piecing it, whereas you guys have articulated it so well in terms of how you stitch your different country experiences together, or even like in my case where I use the different projects that I have to build a new path for myself. I think sometimes instead of just sticking to the traditional paths, which we grew up seeing in the media and hearing from our parents, this age really is about having the mid-career professionals think about, well, maybe pursue something that never existed before, but craft that story out of that. I'm sure you would agree.
100%. I mean, I made the mistake of agreeing to go to Bangkok to work on my own. At that time, I was dating my wife, and she was like flabbergasted. You're going to Bangkok to work, And yes, I thought we are one entity, right? So what you're talking about now on making a decision or having that mindset that we are doing things for us as opposed to doing things for me or her doing something for me, right? Or your spouse is doing something for you. That's very different from doing it for us. Yeah.
You just reminded me something. Doing it for us, then remember, let's say, most of the time when she's making that sacrifice, like it's not 50-50 you mentioned, right? Then when everything settles, like the kids grown up, right? So are you going to find ways to make up the difference? I think that you need to do that. And sometimes making up the difference is not about, you can have access to all my bank account. It's not that. It's not the things that you can see. It's actually things that money cannot buy. And the one good lesson I have is that is your tone. It's just the tone part. And I cannot understand that until I went to study ontology, which is my coaching. Then I realized, body, emotion, language, the tone part. And that shift itself actually is worth a lot.
And what are some tips that you can give on hindsight, right, that you did right, and maybe some things that you think you could have done a bit better?
I am still going through my personal journey, reflecting reflecting what I have done right, what I have not done correctly. And then that's why I get into coaching business, so I can coach the other people. So one thing I think the journey always starts with awareness. Are you aware of what you're doing first? Just like my tone thing, right? But if you're not aware, you can't change. Then when you're aware, you said you need changes. And that's where you have a lot of options. Getting a coach, going to study, to learn more. And then you put it into an action plan. But the awareness is what most of us are lacking. Especially for many of us, we are so hardwired in doing one thing so well, like I'm a problem solver, until my daughter one day says that we don't need a solution to every problem. Just hold the space and listen. Yeah, that part I think is the biggest awareness that I had over the years. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Right. How about you, Chris? Any challenges that you experienced building a life outside in a new place, a new country?
So I sort of reflect on, those that, in my head, successful, whether it's with relationships, or like career or whatever. I think there's like a couple of recurring traits that I typically see. One is, awareness, a deep awareness of where you sit, your phases in life, what I want, my family situation, what are my skill sets, am I good at articulating my ideas? I think some form of deep awareness and where eventually I want to grow. The second is a form of openness and almost resourcefulness on how to navigate a specific sort of piece. Whether it is moving to a new country and trying to find the Singapore community, or whether it is because I love, paddle, and I try to, download the 5 apps for me to, connect with the 5 different communities of paddle so that I can make new friends. because maybe not all my friends are playing paddle, or like whether it is, I want to be on a podcast, so I reached out, think I can contribute. These are like the type of things where you need to be consistently aware of. Oh, that's actually, that could be pretty cool, and sort of be open to serendipitous sort of opportunities to meet new people, to make new connections, make new friends. I think that's really important because that sometimes the chance encounter is the one you need to take you in a completely different direction, where you'll be like, oh, never thought that would have happened, but actually one coffee made the difference in the world.
If we fast forward that, right, to a question which is more recent, the repatriation, right, coming back, were there any challenges that you experienced? I mean, different culture, different people. Was it difficult to get into a state of flow when you came back?
The time zones were really, really bad.
Still time zones.
I have to emphasize on that, because specifically you don't really feel that is a problem until you worked overseas. You're like, wow, this is wonderful. Like, time zone is someone else's problem. Then you come back, oh man, it's my problem again. So it's hard to articulate how disruptive that is. So when I was in London, it's entirely common to see the office empty out at 4 p.m., 4 or 5 p.m. because, nursery's out. You got to pick up your kids. You got to cook because, you may not necessarily have help at home to, do dinner. So all of these considerations, are just sort of things that is day to day there. Whereas over here, because of time zone, there are, I think, certain lifestyle choices that we may not necessarily be very aware of until you see the contrast of how other people live.
I agree, totally agree, because I climbed to the head of a regional role, several regional departments in my previous corporate job. And when I was dealing with the US markets, it was so painful because of all the late night calls. But then I moved companies into one that was also UK founder led. And just like what you say, they emphasize, they'll be like, why are you still here at 4 p.m. in their own offices? So as a result, the calls never drag past a certain time. It doesn't go as late as 11 p.m. or 1 a.m. when I was in the role dealing with the US offices. So I think sometimes also is that cultural expectations. Like if you are working in Singapore, but you're mostly dealing with the Europeans, it could actually still be a little easier. Yeah, the problem's not that bad. But if you're dealing with the US, then you got to be prepared to work a lot more out of the after hours zone.
That's right. Yeah. So time zones. I mean, that's a hard one to swallow. I mean, everything else is manageable, but time zones is very disruptive.
It's a very good wake up call.
Yeah.
And Hon Mun, for you, time zone wouldn't be that much of an issue, right? What do you think was the biggest one with coming back?
If our family is out there for extended period of time, most likely the children, let's say 10 years. 10 years is a big period of time for the children. They would have grown, they have their friends, and they will be immersed in a culture that is very different from Singapore. I can almost say that most places out there is bigger than Singapore in terms of land, in terms of the density, right? So there will be a lot of adjustment. And this is the family part of it. Then career part of it is depends. If you work for a company that is expanding into Southeast Asia or Asia, and Singapore is the headquarters, then you call the shots lah. So there's no trying to get immersed back into the environment. But what if you're not and you're back here and you have to report to a different management? You don't have the connections, you don't have that relationship and all this. It can be pretty. So the unknown, I think not knowing the unknown.
And it's almost starting from scratch, right?
It's almost, I think the way that I would say to many of my coaching clients would be, you got to change your mindset. It's all in your mind. If your mindset is really, why not? Why can't I do it? What do I have to lose? Then that is a good start. Yeah.
So what is that biggest gain that both of you think is achievable only when you go for an overseas role instead of just staying to Singapore and climbing to the top?
Singapore is really small, and everything works in Singapore. Yeah. And actually, I don't mean it in a good way. Because everything works here, I think sometimes we lose perspective that, the world has a lot of problems that we can help solve. And in the process of solving problems, you're either making impact, you're making money, you're making essentially being in a completely different environment, living in a country where traffic is going to be 2 hours. It brings a lot of perspective in life on the uncertainty of life. But at the same time, it gives you a much bigger appreciation when things go right.
I think living overseas constantly put me in a very discomfort situation. And then you have to decide. And many times I fail too. But if you take failure as, it's nothing wrong with failing, but it's what you do with that failure. And failure actually stretches your muscle, and that's where you grow. So I always said, no discomfort, no growth. When you feel discomfort, it's good because you are growing. But if you say the moment you feel a little bit discomfort and you avoid it, then you go back. Let's go back to Singapore. It's very difficult for you to grow. And if you have that mindset over years and decades, then when the time when you really need to pivot, like you got lay off, you lose your job at the age of 50 or something like that, then you just don't know how to grow.
You just reminded me of something, which was I've not done an overseas posting, but living overseas and as an exchange student forced me to be more innovative about finding solutions, because there's a lot more problems to be fixed. Things go wrong, like you said. But more importantly, is also finding these despite not having the resources.
Yes.
So staying in Singapore, if this breaks, I go here to find the answers. I call my mom and dad. But when you're alone in an overseas country, you have to find your own answers.
And then you'll find out, wow, I didn't know I have this superpower.
And that's a confidence boost. So if you guys are thinking about making a mid-career switch or been toying around with the idea of moving abroad for your career or your own personal growth, we hope that Hon Mun and Chris' stories help to motivate you and give you a framework on what you should consider and think about before you take that plunge.
But caveat, please check with your partner or spouse before you make that decision.
Yes. Or do it early in your 20s when you have less of that. So thank you for tuning in for this episode of Wise and Shine. We hope you have enjoyed listening to their stories and it helps guide you on your next career decision. But before we end,
if you are not already following us on our mailing list, please head on to our website www.thefinancialcoconut.com and leave your email address there so that when we launch new episodes, you will be informed.
And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with your friends and let us know in the comments so we can produce more of such stories for you. Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Wise and Shine. We'll see you on the next one. Bye!